Have you ever made a blanket and by the end of the project you noticed that the sides were so wonky and warped that no amount of blocking was going to save it? I have a trick where we're going to resurrect that blanket and make it a project that you can be proud of. Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany. In this video, I'm going to share with you how to do my cover-up blanket border. The idea for this border is that it will hide the sides of your blanket simply by covering them up and showcasing all those gorgeous stitches and everything on the center part of your blanket, and nobody will know that there was anything wrong with the sides at all. If you end up finding this video to be very helpful and you really like it, please push that thumbs up button, subscribe to my channel if you like the content for more videos coming up, and maybe even share it with a friend. When you're ready, let's go ahead and dive into the materials I used to get started. All right, so the materials that we're going to need for our cover-up blanket border is the same materials that we used on the inner body of the project itself, plus a couple extra things. The yarn that we're going to need for our border is the same yarn we used on the inner body of the project. That way everything matches and it goes well together, but the color you choose is completely up to you, personal preference. So if you want your blanket border to be one solid color, that would look really nice. It's highly likely you're going to need to purchase more yarn as we're going to be using quite a bit of yarn for our border, but having it be a frame around our project, not competing with what's going on the inside, it draws our eye to all the stitches and what's happening on the inner body of the project. Another option for your border would be to use up your scraps. I mean, we're gonna have a lot of scrap yarn left over after this project, and this is a great solution on what to do with them. Plus, the colors of our scraps are already integrated in the project itself, so it would make sense. I did a little bit of both. I started my blanket border with a couple rounds of a solid color, so I went and I purchased more yarn so that way I could accomplish this. And then I ended my blanket border with a couple rounds of scrap yarn so I could use up my scraps. The other materials you're going to need is your crochet hook, which is the same crochet hook you used on the inner body of the project, as well as the same yarn needle tapestry needle and the same embroidery scissors. The additional materials that you're going to need is a tape measure or something to measure with. That's going to be very important. 4 stitch markers, so that way we can identify the parts of the blanket we want to cover up, and a piece of paper to write on, something to write with, so we can draw an image or diagram of our blanket, write down all our numbers, and keep count of things. This is just going to be a great reference point for us to write everything down and refer back to. All right, go ahead and grab all of your materials, everything you're going to need, and we will move on to the next step, which is blocking off the parts of our blanket that we want to cover up. Grab your tape measure and let's identify which parts of this blanket we want to cover up. The top and the bottom of the blanket are generally the flat sides. It's the sides of the blanket that are the wonky parts. So lay your blanket down and smooth it out so that way you can see one side of your blanket. Then take your measuring tape and stretch it out as far as it'll go. Find the side or the part of the side that is inverted the most or into the blanket the most. And for me, it's right here where the baubles are. That section right here is where it seems to be inverted or into the center the most. I'm going to take my measuring tape and I'm going to lay it flat 1 more inch into the project. And then I'm going to bring my measuring tape to the edge of my project, and I'm going to mark this spot with a stitch marker. Great. And then I'm going to come to the other side. Making sure that everything is straight is going to be very important. Mark that stitch. Perfect. So now we have 1 stitch marked on one side, 1 stitch marked on the other, and now we want to rotate our blanket and do the exact same thing on the other side. Now that we have marked off our stitches, we are going to start counting. Grab your paper and your writing utensil, and we are going to draw a rectangle to represent our blanket. Ta-da! Rectangle. First, start with the top and the bottom of the blanket and count how many stitches are between the two stitch markers on the top. Write that down. Then count the bottom, write that down. Do not think that the top and the bottom are going to be the same. In the ideal world, they would be, but not always the case. So count both the top and the bottom separately and write down your numbers. Great. Once you've written down your numbers for how many stitches are on the top, how many stitches are on the bottom, now we're going to count how many stitches we're going to want to make on the sides of our blanket. Now there's a couple rules of thumb. If you're looking at the sides of your blanket, if that last stitch is a single crochet or a half double crochet, then we're only going to make one stitch in the side of that row. If that stitch, the first stitch, right on the side of the blanket, if that stitch is a double crochet or a chain 2 or possibly a chain 3, because double crochets can be represented either by a chain 2 or a chain 3, then we're going to be making 2 stitches in the side of that row. I'm going to make sure I have that written down for you so you got that covered. We want to count how many stitches we need to make on the sides of our blanket. Now, unfortunately, I can't tell you that because depending on how you worked your blanket, your number could be very different than mine, and I don't want to skew your number and mess up your blanket border. So just take a second. If you need to, stretch out your blanket so you can really see your rows, your individual rows, and do the best you can. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We have just identified how many stitches we're going to need to make it all the way around our blanket. Now let's go ahead and grab our crochet hook, grab our yarn, and dive into starting this blanket border. Like I said, my blanket border started with a solid color with the first few rounds, and so I have my solid color right here, Hue and Me 2 of Wands, which is the same yarn I used for the main body of my blanket. And this color is Shadow, and I have 3 of them to help give me a couple of rounds and one solid color. And then over here I have all of my scraps that I will use on the edges to just use them up. I have my piece of paper here where I wrote down all of my number of stitches along the top, along the bottom, and along each side. And then I also removed the stitch markers from my blanket since I don't need them there anymore, because I'm going to actually use them in this next step. So make sure you have all 4 stitch markers or at least an additional 4 stitch markers to use right now. And your crochet hook, obviously. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is establish the foundation of our border. Creating a slip knot, attaching crochet hook, and now we're going to chain the number of chains that was along the top. So I wrote down 109, so I need to chain 109. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 106, 107, 108, 109. Grabbing the stitch marker, and I'm going to place the stitch marker in that last stitch or the 109th stitch. Right there. Great. Going back to my paper. Now I'm going to look to see what would be, I just went across, what would be the number going down. And I have 109 stitches going down. What do you have on your paper? We are now going to chain this many chains. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 107, 108, 109. Grab your stitch marker, mark that stitch when you reach the number of stitches along the side. Okay, look at your paper. Okay, so we've done the top, we've done the side, now we're going to do the bottom. And the number you have on your bottom is the number of chains you are now going to chain. So I am going to start chaining an additional 109 stitches. Here we go. 109 stitch marker. There we go. All right, paper. Okay, we've completed the top. We've completed one side, we just completed the bottom. Now we have the last side that we need to chain. So how many stitches do you have on the other side of your blanket? Highly most likely it's going to be the exact same number as the other side, but you might throw me off. I don't know. So just go for the number you wrote on this side of the blanket and start chaining this amount. 107, 108, 109. Mark this stitch. There we go. Great. This is the fourth stitch, leading us right back to the beginning. So what we're going to do now is we're going to slip stitch into the very first stitch of this chain. But we want to make sure we untwist it before we slip stitch. That way we don't have any twists happening in our foundation row, because that will show up in the border. And this part is the part that's the innermost part of the border and will show up the most. So go ahead and just take your thumbs and run them across your chain, untwisting, making sure it's straight. And you can go slow, it's all right. This part's just very important to untwist. Great, once you get to the very first stitch you made, bring it over to your current stitch that you've made. And my stitch marker is actually like in the middle of the yarn, so it's preventing me from doing anything. Okay, and slip stitch into that very first stitch to close our circle. Now, if you have any experience with working crochet tops, we are basically making a yoke. And if you get that, then you know exactly what these stitch markers are for, and you can probably move forward just knowing we are making half double crochet stitches in every stitch, and these are our corners. If you've never really made a top before, or you have no idea what a yoke is, what we are basically doing is making one stitch, again, in every stitch space, and each one of these marked off stitch markers is a corner. And we're going to increase in only these stitches. And that is going to create a frame. We are basically just making the frame of the border that we will then attach on top of our blanket. Do you get the picture? Do you see it? Does the vision come to you now? Yes, yes, it's amazing and it works so well. So we're going to go ahead and start by chaining one. And then we're going to make a half double crochet in the same stitch we just slip stitched into. To begin, we will make one half double crochet stitch in every stitch all the way to our next stitch marker. When we get to our stitch markers, the way I am doing the pattern is I'm going to have us make 4 half double crochet stitches in this corner spot. And that will make sense as we go round after round after round and build. You'll see why I did that. But if you want to work your corners any other way that you're most comfortable, feel free. It's a corner. So go ahead and continue on. I will meet you at the first corner to show you how to work your corners. Coming upon corner number 1, last stitch right before it. Great. Okay, remove stitch marker and make 4 half double crochet stitches in that one stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, look at that corner. Great. Now I'm going to put my stitch marker in the very first stitch that I made in that stitch space. And continue on. Now that's what you're going to do for every single corner or every single stitch that has a stitch marker in it. Make 4 half double crochets and put the stitch marker back in the very first half double crochet stitch that you made for that corner. I will meet you at the very end of round 1 to show you how we're going to close this round. Awesome. And how I'm going to help myself out with the join is I'm going to come at that first half double crochet stitch from behind my working yarn, behind the stitch, come forward underneath both loops, then grab the yarn and pull it backwards, and then pull through the loop on my crochet hook. I'm going to keep pulling because I want to make my first stitch for round 2 back in these stitches here. All right, so we just finished off round 1. We have 1 row. What's great is now we can measure this row. For me, with this yarn and this stitch, every round should be approximately 1 inch wide. So now we think back to our blanket right here. We know that the side that we stopped in at or came inwards on the sides to cover up was at least this bare chain for us to make as our foundation. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start building the thickness of our blanket border. If you need to, refer back to your blanket and find out how wide you need your blanket border to be. So for me, I'm gonna move all this. It brings me right here. I need my border to be at least 5-inch wide border, so that way I can go past far beyond what I need to cover up here and still cover. Now, it would be a great idea for you to then go to all 4 sides of your blanket, because if there was a row on this side of the blanket that was further out where you needed to cover up 6 inches, then you need to make sure that your blanket border is at least going to be wide enough to cover up the part that you want to cover up. That is why this is called the cover up border. And if you want to, after every round, you can bring your border to your blanket and you can lay it down. And you can just lay this blanket on the floor so it'll spread out, and then put your cover up border on it and see, okay, now that I've laid the border all across the top of the blanket, is it covering everything up that I want to cover up? And if you need to add an extra round, then add an extra round. This is brilliant because you can literally continue making this border as wide as you need it to be to cover up whatever you need to cover up and hide whatever you want to hide. So that way no one will see the part that is unappealing. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat this round for a total of 9 rounds for my cover up border. That's how many rounds I'm going to need to cover everything up. I'm going to show you this last corner of every single round, so that way you can see how everything is working up, building up, and you can kind of see what to expect. For round 2, I will show you the first corner so you can know how to work the first corner, and then every single corner after that, round after round after round, will be done identical to the one corner we do for round 2. All right, so I won't have to show you that over and over again because it's the same thing. For round 2, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull my yarn a little bit, and then I'm going to come backwards. I want to come backwards to the next stitch. So I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to insert my crochet hook in the 4th half double crochet stitch that I made in my corner. Yarn over, pull through, then yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. There we go. Let me do that again for you because it is weird. So we just slip stitched to close round 1. I'm going to keep pulling my yarn, going to yarn over and insert my crochet hook into the half double crochet stitch that's right behind me, that 4th half double crochet of the corner. 3 loops on my hook, yarn over and pull through. And now continue working 1 half double crochet stitch in each stitch all the way across the top, and I will meet you in that first corner of round 2 to show you how to work the corners. All right, let's work the corners, guys. So just reached my first stitch marker. Remember, we placed our first stitch marker in the very first half double crochet stitch of the corner 4. Once you get to the stitch marker, you're going to make 1 half double crochet stitch in the first stitch, 2 half double crochet stitches in the second stitch, 1, 2, 2 half double crochet stitches in the third stitch, 1, 2, and then 1 half double crochet in the fourth stitch, 1. Now look at the 2 stitches where you made 2 stitches. So I have 1, 2, 1, 2. I want to place my stitch marker back in the very first half double crochet where there is an increase, or there are 2. Great. And that's all you're doing. That's it. That's how we will do every single corner of this blanket border, every single round. Continue on, and I will meet you at the end of round 2 to show you how to close round 2. Corner number 4, round 2. Closing round 3. And that is what round 3 looks like when it's all closed. Let's go ahead and begin round 4. Ending round 4. beginning round 5. Closing up round 5. There we go. And this is what it looks like at the end of round 5. Now moving on to round 6. Then pull into the stitch to close. And what that does is it hides the join so much better than if we were to slip stitch the normal way, because if we slip stitch the normal way, it's going to have a very pronounced line. And this way really hides it. Now, when it comes to what I'm going to do for my blanket border, the first 6 rounds I'm using the same color. And then I'm going to switch over to my scraps. So I'm going to go ahead and tie off this color. I do want to leave a good amount left over so that way I can use this yarn to attach this part of the border to my blanket, and you won't be able to see the stitches as they join because they camouflage in. We want to make sure we have some of that left over. We do not want to use every bit of it. Tie off. Now to go ahead and rejoin some yarn to the project, let's go ahead and work this color. Just whatever color kind of comes at us. I'm going to go ahead and slip stitch into the stitch that is right behind where I closed round 6, or the round before. So where I closed, we have the slip knot right there. I want to actually begin in the stitch right behind it. So slip stitch to attach the yarn to the project, then chain 1 and half double crochet in that stitch we just slip stitched into, and now begin where we are just going to go ahead and continue working the pattern as normal. So that stitch right here actually goes in there. Slip stitches can really confuse. So this stitch is actually on top of this one. So you choose if you want to go under the slip stitch or if you want your second stitch to be on top, or you can just go right there. I hope that makes sense. There we go. Okay, I just want to make sure that's clear. And then we're good. And ending round 9, closing it up. I'm stopping at round 9 because this many rounds makes my blanket border wide enough to cover the imperfections of my blanket itself, plus have a little hanging over the edge so I can join it together. And that will make more sense here in a second. Great, tied that off. Gonna go ahead and tie off the work. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my actual blanket and lay it flat on the floor. And then I'm going to take this border and I'm going to lay it on top of the blanket and see how it looks and see if I want to add any more rounds before I finish completely. Great, now that I know that the border will fit around my blanket and it's exactly what I want, now I'm going to make a second one of these frames. Why? Because when I attach this frame to the blanket, we're still going to be able to see the other side, and that doesn't look very good. So if we have a second one of these that we can put on the back and then join these two together, the front and the back panel, then that will completely frame the blanket, both the front and the back. And there's nothing, you're hiding everything. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to make a second one of these. Then we will come back to this project. We will pin everything down, and then we will join the front and the back frame together with a whip stitch, or just sewing it right through the inner body of the blanket and just attaching it to the blanket itself. All right, closing up this outer border. Go ahead and take that beginning tail with the end here and tie a knot. Great, grab my scissors, cut a long enough tail to weave in those ends. And I'm not going to do it right now, but I will take these two tails and I will weave them on the inside so that way they're all cleaned up and all put away. The next thing we're going to do is now attach this border to the blanket and pin it together with stitch markers, and then move on to the next step. Once we have finished joining the outer sides of the two borders together, the front and the back panel, we can come back to the floor where the blanket is all stretched out, and then we can tuck the blanket between the two, the front and the back, and make our way all the way around the blanket, tucking the whole blanket in between. And now we can start joining the border to the blanket itself. We have two options. Option number one, we can take all of our stitch markers and we can join the border to the blanket all the way around. Then we can pick up our blanket, take it to a comfortable spot like our chair or a table where we can start taking our yarn needle and our yarn and literally just sewing this border onto the blanket in and out of the stitches. I have here the same color yarn I used for the first few rounds. I'm hoping that I have enough. And this way, my join of the border to the blanket, I won't be able to see it because I'm using the same color yarn to attach the border to the blanket that is the border color. So that's option one. The second option is we can just go ahead and start joining the border to the blanket here on the floor. I mean, the blanket's already laid out. We can make sure that everything stays consistent. We can just be more observant of what's happening with the blanket as we are joining the border to it. But those are two options for you, and I'll let you decide which one will work best for you. I think for me personally, keeping this blanket on the floor is going to give me the best outlook of attaching the border to the blanket, because then I can watch the whole thing while I'm joining to make sure if I need to make any adjustments, I can. After you have finished joining the border to your blanket all the way around, this is approximately what you should be looking at. Pretty cool, right? It squares off the sides so they look perfectly flat, and it hides all those imperfections for you. Oh, I think it's so cool. I hope you give it a try, and I hope that it saves your blanket project if the sides of your blanket are looking pretty wonky. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you at the next one. Bye.